Right, we welcome you all back to Integrative Theology. I am your host, Bishop Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and today, Lecture 9 is going to focus on the human mens. The human mens. Let's begin. Our scripture reference is going to be Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, Psalms 149 and 3, Hebrews 2 and 6. Genesis states, God formed man from the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Psalms 149 and Hebrews 2 and 6 speaks of there was one in a certain place who said, "What is man that thou art mindful of him?" And so we're going to dive right in. The examination of man has been an ongoing interest of both angels and other men. It appears that a particular angel in a certain place, and this term for place is the word pu, and it means where, what place, a certain vicinity or a fixed place in existence. The question was, what is man that thou art, or that you are mindful and remember him? And so when we look at the term what, it is rendered in the New Testament from Hebrews, tis. And so tis in the Greek asks the question, what manner of thing? They did not understand man at all. Man in his nature shocked them. Before that, every being they knew was created from the very breath of God, the exertion of God's essence himself, the essence then that releases the consciousness of God's will and the consciousness of God's desire for a construct that we call ontological reality. What manner of thing is this thing? It is clear that man's nature and significance was unknown. When angels saw God creating Adam, there was already a division in heaven. The fallen angels had already been dispersed, and then the secundi heavens, or the second heavens, were populated there, and they began to organize. And since the time of them traversing the state of final essence, or what we call finite transcendence, they then began to organize, and they are organizing to this day. They consistently reorganize, reinvent, relearn, re-strategize, because they never know what God is doing, but when God does something they are not aware of, they have to rebound to stop it. When they see congregations now beginning to pray, beginning to consecrate, they have to up their game, because they have a secret surveillance that most people in the church don't understand how to deal with. And so they have consistent intel coming in about individuals, families, communities, and churches. And so it's very interesting. Some adhere to the notion that Lucifer and other spiritual beings revolted when God created man. However, this does not appear to be the case, because we see that Lucifer did not say, because you make man, we're going to leave. He said, I will exalt my throne above all the stars. This happened way before man was created. And this very well could be what people call the gap theory, or why the state of Tohu Vabohu was on the earth. Because whenever you see Tohu Vabohu together, it symbolizes some type of judgment. very important. And this is why this still radiates in what we call the theological circles. So in the days when the realm of finite eternity was fresh, Lucifer became twisted by the state of iniquity as he allowed his own heart to be mesmerized by his own status, by his own nature, by his own substantial being. And this is according to Isaiah 14:13 through 14, Ezekiel 28:12 through 18. And here we see that this same Lucifer, as the serpent, or the Bible calls him Nakash, saw the creation of Adam and apparently heard what God told Adam as far as the commandment not to eat the tree. Questions may arise, why did God allow him to hear? Because God is not afraid of opposition. And God knows very well that what he intends to do will be done, and nobody can stop his ultimate will or his will of finality. And so this being heard, this being saw from the very beginning. And so he was given a commandment not to eat from the tree of life, tree of knowledge and good and evil, excuse me. Genesis, and I'm going to take these off. It seems like I can see a little better without them. And so this serpent, possibly a fallen seraphim with specialized cherubic traits or powers, because one translation says, and I will set thee a seraphim before or in the midst of the cherub. And so that's why he appears as a seraph or as a serpent, because serpents were associated with the seraph, a fiery serpent. And so when we look in heaven, we see that there are the four beasts that compose and become the cherubim. There is what we call the anthropoi, or the anthropos, the man-faced creature, the moskos, the ox-faced creature, the ahetos, the eagle-like creature, and then there is Leon, the lion-faced creature. And these are the cherubim. But it's believed that the seraph, according to a lot of definitions in the Old Testament, they were likened unto serpents. And they were beautiful during that place and time. And that's why Eve did not think it strange that a Nakash could speak to her. This serpent, again, possibly a fallen seraph with specialized cherubic traits or powers, listened very clearly to all that was said. Demons hear what God has told you through the word and through your pronunciation of it. They watch, and in many cases, they have scrambled certain signals in your brain, and they are inducing certain thoughts and behaviors, and they watch your response. If we can interpret signals that have been scrambled and then turn it into usable information, why do we think that angelic beings or pneumatic beings who are much more intelligent than us can't? So this serpent called Nakash was a serpent, snake, image of a serpent. It's called in some cases the fleeing serpent or snake from reason of its hissing sound. And so Nakash in the fallen state seems to be a hisser, which means something that mumbles or whispers. If you've ever heard people whisper, it sounds when they especially don't want you to hear them. And so Nakash, it comes from another word that looks just like it, Nakash, but a different term. It means to hiss, whisper, a magical spell. to prognosticate. Prognostication then is prophecy of a future event. And so it appears then that this serpent, he understands prophecy quite well. He understands magic quite well. And so a magical spell can be an induction to cause a person's mind to be controlled and shifted. It can be an inducement of what we call a mental assertion to get someone to feel a certain thing. And so it deals with mental manipulation, a changing of the quality of thought, feelings, and choices. And so as we look at it, the Nakash is also known to be a tempter who whispers in the heart of its victims. Temptation, when you're luring people apart, can almost be a seductive, hypnotic force, because you are giving post-hypnotic suggestions for those individuals to let down their guard and to accept. Lucifer knows to a great degree the nature of man. He knows that man is formed from the dust of the ground, which according to the text is the word afar, and it comes from min, and so he is formed from the dust, min, the ground, or dust of. The term min is of, and that means it is a preposition, and it states where something proceeds forth out of, the direction in which it comes. And so it's very interesting. And one of the things that angelic beings may have considered, specifically the fallen, is that you've created this, whatever it is, out of the dust that we have walked on. What is this thing that we've walked on that is worthless to us? And you've breathed breath into it, and it's living, and you say it's in your image, but it's dust. And so the dust, the afar, the dust that is powdered, clay, earth, gray earth, and in some cases ashes. It's also considered to be mortar and ultimately rubbish. He understands that the body is the tool of his learning about his surrounding. And that gives us a very interesting take on this as well. If the sensory mechanisms of the body of man is the way he receives information, then he's literally receiving information from that which was literally rubbish. And so in his fallen state, all of his processing units will amount to rubbish, garbage, trying to interpret information around its surroundings. Therefore, it indicates then, I believe prophetically, in the fallen state of man, that man in his processing unit can only process from the perspective in which he is. And that means in the fallen state, no matter what we see, we will always see the worst, and we will always think the worst. Satan and spiritual entities understand to a degree how the human nervous system works. Remember, they were there. They see it. They understand touch, smell, taste, and that's why they use it against us in so many cases. Remember, they inspire such of a knowledge, or the knowledge in which, men consider and develop and teach, such as modern psychology, neurology, and all of those things. They help to what? Inspire it, specifically the part that takes people away from God. When you study psychology and you say there is no soul, then you're saying there is no God who created a soul. And so they have helped to inspire secular investigation that negates God. And so they understand it only from an operational position, but they don't understand it from a spiritual position as to why, how. They only understand the what. And so Satan has more of an up on psychology, sociology, than even those who study it, because he knows directly who created it. And so in modern studies of man, psychology, sociology, so forth and so on, they brought this into being to negate the belief in God. They brought it into being so individuals can resist receiving the word of God or the scriptures. They brought it into being so mankind can have dependence upon himself and not dependence upon God. They brought it into being, these studies, so it can erode the faith and the trust of man on God and turn it upon themselves. They brought it into being and inspired it because man, they know, has a need and expectancy of the supernatural. And so they brought an alternative supernatural where man, through soul travel, man, through cosmic consciousness, can now control the universe. And so they understand to a great degree the very nature of man. They know that through his senses, he gains information, but they also know that man is body, mind, and spirit. And therefore they understand he has physical needs or physical instincts, he has mental needs, mental instincts, and spiritual needs, spiritual instincts. Part of those spiritual instincts is the need for the supernatural, the need for miraculous, the need to be able to imagine the impossible and to see themselves doing something that helps them to escape the bondage to the natural world. And so when we look at it, mind versus men's. From a philosophical, theological standpoint, the mind is defined as the essence of a human. It is considered to be the living soul. As the soul, it would be what people call in the Latin or in philosophy, the animus or the animi. And these two things, animus or animi, can mean the following: spirit, breath, or soul, depending on how it's used. So when we look at men's is mind, but it is the mind primarily operating in the faculty of reasoning. And this is the reasoning of an individual or the reasoning of the mind, whereas mind is soulish substance, soulish reality, which is empowered to think, feel, respond, and to choose. And so mind is the state of the soul with the capacity to do so. But the men's, and this is very important, is the operating in the faculties of reasoning. And that's the distinction. The mind is elocution or intellect, emotion, and volition, whereas men's primarily focuses on reasoning. And reasoning We would say critical thinking, we would say logic, and so it is the aspect of intelligence, cognitive abilities to think rationally and put things together. So now when you hear me say men's, now you know what men's is. We're dealing with the intellect, his rationality, his cognitive ability to learn, to solve problems. And that's very important, because if you never learn to solve problems, you will never learn to figure out problems that can occur from a spiritual basis. And so the term animus, when we deal with its original term, we know it comes from the Greek philosophy, but it is a Jungian term, Carl Gustav Jung, uh, and he referred to the psychological aspect of the animus. And so he said the animus is the unconscious masculine archetype within a woman's psyche, which represents the rational, logical, and spiritual aspects within the woman's unconscious. And so it is the masculinity of the woman that she has to enhance to become what? Rational, logical, and spiritual. The animus is said that, or the animus is that which helps the woman mediate between conscious and the unconscious mind to resolve her masculine part. And this makes sense to a degree, because remember, God pulls Eve out of man and she still retains some of his masculinity, and Adam still retains some of the femininity of man, and they have to be resolved or they will cause conflicting issues. And so this animus helps the woman to understand and integrate her masculine aspects, such as assertiveness, intellectual curiosity, problem-solving abilities. The animus is the unconscious, the anima. Remember, animus, unconscious masculinity in females. The anima is the unconscious feminine side of the man that is the counterpart for the animus. Anima is said to be the archetype of life itself, and therefore in men. And when it's in men, it allows them to exercise the feminine archetype of the minds or of the men's unconscious. It allows men to tap into deep-rooted empathic powers of nurturing, connecting, consoling, and comforting. The anima enables women, or the animus enables women to accept eros. And there's more than just three types of Greek terms for love. The eros then is the erotic love, the erotic connection. And according to Jung, this means women will develop logos, or reasoning and rationality. When she accepts the erotic part of her, she then begins to accept the drive that men have, but it's in a feminine state of being. And so the anima in the Latin refers to the soul or life principles. It is the basis of animation, which means animating or enlivening. And that's very important. So we're still talking about the mens of man, how the consciousness of man operates. So the animating or enlivening aspect of man causes now the mind to be active in thinking, and the mind to be active in exerting its thoughts through its physiology to achieve what it desires to do. And it causes men to move as though living, but living in the perspective of the masculine. And so when we speak of masculinity and femininity, we speak of sexes. We're talking about female, talking about male. This then divergence in the, I'll say, human race, these divergences then are what we call qualitative life in eschatology. Qualitative life is the quality in which each sex imbues its physiology and its mind. Qualitative life is based upon and it is exerted from the very structure of the body. Your physiology determines the quality in which you will behave and manifest yourself. A female manifests herself as a female because her body creates female hormones that give her a specific or a specificity of behavior. Her voice even comes out softer unless she has more male hormones exerting through her. She is typically XX, and every now and then a female may get an XXX, and people think that the XXX makes her more feminine, but in reality, when you look at it from a genetic marker, an extra female hormone in many cases can masculinize her and cause cretinism. Okay. And so when we have again male and female qualitative life, it comes from the basis of your biology. When a man is born and that testosterone begins to move in, then the quality in which he thinks is going to be from a masculine point of view. The quality in which he speaks is going to be from a masculine point of view. And so our bodies cause the differences in our behaviors. Now, when we speak of gender, gender is very important because it's based on biological factors of which qualitative life you manifest. And genders then are the roles that are placed on male and female by any given society. And that's why people used to say, girls don't behave like that. Young ladies don't talk like that. They don't sit that way. And we will say then, is that nonsense? Because on one hand, that is people putting pressure on people to behave a certain way where they may not want to. But remember, it is God that gives knowledge on how socialization should be established. Now, animation is the process of the soul performing actions of doing something, and that is thinking, responding, choosing. And so the breath of God, directed by his Logos, produced Adam. Remember, all things were created by him. There's nothing that was not created by him, the Logos. And so it's not just the dust of the ground, but it is also the breath, and the breath carried with it the mindset or the Logos, the instructions, the imagery of what God desired to come, and the breath produced the image in the thought processes of the mind of God. Again, the Logos, the thought is the blueprint. The breath of the Spirit becomes the construction worker that follows the design to the letter. As a living soul, Adam was an anima psyche or anima psyche, a living, breathing creature engaging in the actions of operating his own personal logos. Every human, every thinking individual has a logos. It is the operation of their individuality, thinking their thoughts, their power of their mind to think. And so their logos then, the activation of the logos is the thinking of thought. It is also the mens. It is compartmentalized in mens and mind. It is compartmentalized as logical, rational thinking And ergo, we get what we call emotional intelligence. And then we get volitional intelligence. One of the major problems that people go through is because they don't know how to make intelligent choices. They don't know how to intelligently decide. And so they're always halting between two opinions because they cannot reconcile the logic of their feelings. And so in many cases, we go by the foundation of emotion and we're just moved out without the benefit of emotional intellect. There is a reason why you fall in love. And in many cases, people don't rationally look at, why am I falling in love with this thug who just beat up his mother, his sister, and he's grabbed me up in the collar? And so every aspect of the mind is, number one, tempered by consciousness, tempered by awareness, and tempered by intellect. And we always move and consider the functionalities of our mind, intellect, emotion, and volition by utilizing those very same powers. In other words, we will temper our intellect with our emotion. Okay, I don't feel this. This doesn't make sense. Emotion. Then we choose to either think about it again and to analyze it again. We use our own analytical powers to analyze what we intellectually have developed. It's called rethinking. We emotivize it because if it makes sense in the computation, we still have to resolve it with our emotion and see if we feel safe with the thought, the process. And then the finality, if everything is balanced, we choose to accept it. We do the same thing to our emotion. We'll sit down and say, wait a minute, how come I'm mad? Wait a minute, is this really love? We take the feeling, we analyze it, then we choose to either reanalyze it or we choose to allow ourselves to be carried out by reason of our responses or reactions to what we're in. And every now and then we come to ourselves and we say, wait a minute, I know this isn't love, because love isn't hurting me and this is not what I want. And so we choose the reaction and the reciprocal that we want to experience. Consciousness. We are conscious of our intellect, emotion, and our volition. We are conscious as to whether we're thinking about it at the top level of consciousness, and some of us have trained ourselves to hear us thinking inwardly when a person stands up, and you have to accept, oh, I can't stand so-and-so. But we'd like to keep masking it, and our unconscious is trying to give us some truth through the bridge of the subconscious, and unless we recognize it, we will always hide it. And sometimes the unconscious is trying to tell you, because it is being motivated by the spirit, you need to work on this because you really have a nasty attitude towards this, and me. And so the human mens can refer to the mind, but specifically refers to the actual rational aspect of logic. This means the intellectual aspect of receiving knowledge, how you receive it, preparing to receive it, knowing what to do with it when you receive it, and then turning it into usable form. The examination of knowledge. How do you examine it? Lightly, intermediately, or comprehensively? Do you take every aspect of your intellect, the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious? Because every time you study, you're battling in your intellect as to whether you're going to wade by the shore, swim out a little, or take a deep dive. And in many cases, when we're putting something together, we actually say to ourselves, I don't feel like doing that. And so we take a shortcut. And so analytically, we allow the emotion of comfortability to disrupt our studies when God may be driving us into a deep study so he can give you something that is lasting and something that you will remember. It deals with the analyzation of knowledge. How do you analyze? Most of us don't get to the analyzation part. We are still in the observation, looking at it from afar. Well, scripture says this, that's good for me. But then we forget the examination, where you now look at every aspect and you test every aspect to see if it is working properly as a sophisticated unit. And then the analyzation, now break down every system, see how it works, see how it fits, see how to construct it, how to deconstruct it. Now you have the understanding of every aspect of knowledge. Most of us only get to the observation. Examinations, too much work. Analyzation, way more work. And so we stay with the observation. And so when it comes to seeing what is done, we very seldom see what is done scripturally, grammatically, hermeneutically, exegetically. Hear what's being said. We don't really hear the context of the scriptures, so we, misinterpret. And when you've gathered information from the aspect of error, even your questions, you will ask the wrong questions. And then after analyzing the knowledge, you have to organize the knowledge. After you organize the knowledge, then the application of knowledge. And so the human men's from the theology of man and from men's theology and the field of eschatology will focus on number one, the intellect. This includes the intellectual examination of proology of the intellect, the emotive aspect of the intellect, the intelligent use of the volition. And when we talk about the intellectual examination of the proology, in other words, why do you want to put a certain type of study together? What do you want people to know about the study? And so what are you going to incorporate that will cause their minds to be expanded and will cause a unique difference in how they see what true knowledge is? How do you want them to be spurred or excited or impassionate to become one who is dedicated to the research of the knowledge? So that's the intellectual examination of proology. The emotive aspect of intelligence then deals with how do you feel about receiving the knowledge? Have you become gratified in it? Does it produce passion in it? Because if it produces passion, then your search and seeking for knowledge will then become a pleasure and not necessarily something that's hard work. So what is the emotive aspect? And then the volitional. Intelligence of volition. Are you choosing now to do the right type of study, or are you cutting corners? And in doing a comprehensive study, are you going to be biased, or are you going to go through the process called exegesis, to really just pull out the meaning of the text instead of embellishing it in your favor? This also includes the following: conscious understanding and use of the intellect. Are you conscious that you are purposefully, willfully taking a deep dive? Or are you willfully and purposely shutting it down because it's too much work? You don't feel like doing it. Then the subconscious understanding and the actual communication of the knowledge to make an individual way of the intellect. Are you subconsciously taking directives from the unconscious when something is tell you, don't be satisfied, search a little more? Or the flip side, if you haven't gained control of your unconscious through the spirit, where the spirit can now move through the unconscious, and the unconsciously are saying, I don't want to do this. I'm tired. This is not necessary, because they're not going to understand it anyway. And so your unconscious, depending on whether or not it has spiritual light that is influencing the subconscious and controlling how you choose to study, approach studying, or is filled with something that is carnal that keeps you at a bare minimum. And so unconscious intellect, or that logical information hidden from the conscious, can either be negative, it can be positive, it can be a driving force, or it can be an anesthetizing force, something that tells you, you don't need to do all of this, or something that drives you into excellence. And I'm going to stop right here. I think we introduced quite a few terms that should keep you all busy.